Tyler Brennan wiped the thick black grease from his hands with an old rag that had seen better days. The fabric was so stained it barely did any good anymore, but it was habit at this point. He just finished sealing the coolant line on the Kthari freighter, a job that should have taken 2 hours but stretched to 4 because the previous mechanic had done such a terrible job. The Kthari didn't care about quality work. They only cared about cheap work. Nexus Station Epsilon hummed with constant activity somewhere above his head. Thousands of aliens moving through the marketplace levels, conducting business, making deals, living their lives. But down here in Bay 47, in the maintenance section that most people forgot existed, it was just Tyler and the endless drip of condensation from pipes that were older than he was. The bay smelled like metal, coolant, and that particular staleness that came from recycled air that had been recycled too many times. That's when he heard it. A sound cut through the mechanical hum of the station, something that made Tyler's chest tighten without him fully understanding why. It was a desperate cry, a keening wail that echoed up from somewhere below the deck plates. The sound was wrong. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the groan of stressed metal or the hiss of a faulty valve. This was organic. This was alive. And this was suffering. Tyler stopped mid-motion, his hand still holding the sealing tool. He tilted his head, listening carefully. The sound came again, weaker this time, but unmistakable. The Kthari captain's 4 eyes swiveled toward Tyler from across the bay. The insectoid alien's mandibles clicked together in what Tyler had learned was irritation. His species didn't like delays, and they definitely didn't like their hired help getting distracted. "You hear that?" Tyler asked, pointing downward toward the deck. The captain's translator device chirped to life, converting his clicks and whistles into flat, emotionless words. "Waste processor fauna. Vermin. Ignore it. Finish my ship. I have a schedule." But Tyler couldn't ignore it. He'd been working on space stations long enough to know the difference between a rat scrambling through the walls and something far worse. That wasn't the sound of some mindless creature looking for food scraps. That was the sound of something intelligent. Something that knew it was dying and was calling out in desperation for help that probably wouldn't come. "I'll be right back," Tyler said, already unhooking his tool belt from the freighter's access panel. The Kthari captain's irritated clicks grew louder, faster. "I do not pay for delays, human. Your time is my time." Tyler ignored him. He grabbed his tool belt and headlamp from his workstation nearby, the ancient lamp flickering to life with a dim yellow glow that barely seemed adequate for what he was about to do. His hands moved on autopilot, checking that his multi-tool was still clipped to his belt, that his comm unit was charged. Basic safety protocols that his supervisor had drilled into him years ago. Following the sound, Tyler squeezed through one of the narrow maintenance crawlways that networked beneath the docking bays. These passages were designed for repair drones, not full-grown humans, so he had to turn sideways in places. The walls were slick with condensation, and the air reeked of coolant and ozone so strongly it made his eyes water. He descended, using the metal ladder rungs that were spaced too far apart for comfort, going down 1 level, then 2, then 3 into the station's guts where only maintenance workers ever ventured. His boots hit water. That wasn't normal. These lower levels were supposed to be dry. Tyler's headlamp swept across the passage, and he saw water sloshing around his ankles, rising from somewhere ahead. The cry came again, much closer now, and his heart rate kicked up another notch. He pushed forward, wading through water that rose to his knees, then his thighs. The cold liquid soaked through his work pants, and he could feel the chemical bite of coolant mixed in with the water. That was going to burn later, but he pushed the thought aside. Then he saw it, and every other thought vanished from his mind. Chained to a massive drainage pipe, half submerged in the rising water, was a creature unlike anything Tyler had encountered in his 5 years working the station. It looked like a wolf, but scaled up to something far larger than any Earth animal had a right to be. The creature was easily the size of a full-grown lion, maybe bigger. But what really caught Tyler's attention was its fur. It was pure white, not cream or gray or off-white, but the brilliant white of fresh snow under sunlight. The kind of white that almost seemed to glow in the dim light of his headlamp. The creature's amber eyes locked onto Tyler's face, and in that instant, he saw something that made his breath catch. Intelligence. Clear, unmistakable intelligence burning in those eyes. This wasn't an animal. This was a person. And this person was dying. The white wolf tried to lift its massive head above the rising water line and failed. Its strength was clearly fading. The chains binding it rattled and clanked against the pipe, creating echoes in the flooded chamber. Around its thick neck, Tyler could see a broken translator collar sparking and fizzing uselessly. The device was damaged beyond repair, probably shorted out by the water. Tyler checked the time display on his wrist chrono. The water was rising fast, fed by what looked like a coolant leak from the pipes 3 levels up. He could see the steady stream pouring in. At this rate, maybe 15 minutes before this entire section was completely flooded. 15 minutes before the creature drowned. His mind raced, already calculating what he'd need. Those chains were industrial grade, probably titanium alloy. The locks looked Vrexian, which meant they were designed to be tamper-proof. Getting through them would require either the right key codes or serious cutting equipment. And he had maybe 15 minutes. Probably less. Okay, Tyler muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the cramped space. Okay, I've got you. Just hang on. Just hold on for me. The wolf creature's amber eyes followed him as he turned and started running back toward the ladder, splashing through the water as fast as he could move. Behind him, Tyler heard the chains rattle one more time, a weaker sound than before. But in those dying amber eyes, for the first time in what must have been days of suffering, something flickered to life. Something the creature probably thought it had lost forever. Oh! Tyler burst through the door of his workshop so hard it slammed against the wall with a metallic clang. Jenny Kim nearly dropped the torque wrench she was holding, spinning around with wide eyes. She was one of the other human mechanics who worked the station's lower levels, and they'd developed that kind of silent understanding that came from being part of a small community in a massive alien station. Tyler, what the... No time, Tyler cut her off, his words coming fast and breathless. Plasma cutter, breather masks, and my salvage kit. No. Right now. Jenny didn't ask questions. She just moved. That was the thing about the humans on Epsilon that Tyler had always appreciated. They didn't waste precious seconds demanding explanations when one of their own was moving with that kind of desperate purpose. Questions could come later. Action came first. She yanked open the storage locker and started pulling out equipment, her movements quick and efficient. Need help? She called over her shoulder as Tyler loaded his arms with gear, checking the plasma cutter's charge level and cursing under his breath when he saw it was only at 70%. Not yet. Maybe. I honestly don't know what I'm walking into down there. Tyler was already moving toward the door, his arms full of equipment that clanked and rattled with each step. Then he ran. His boots pounded against the metal deck plating as he retraced his path through the maintenance corridors. His lungs burned from the sprint, from breathing in the chemical-tainted air of the lower levels. The equipment was heavy and awkward in his arms, but he didn't dare slow down. Every second counted. Every heartbeat mattered. When Tyler reached the flooded chamber again, his stomach dropped. The water had risen another foot, maybe more. The white wolf's muzzle barely cleared the surface now, its nostrils flaring desperately as it fought to keep its head up. The powerful struggles he'd seen before had weakened to occasional twitches. The creature was giving up. Its body was shutting down, conserving what little energy remained. Tyler didn't hesitate. He waded directly into the water, gasping as the toxic coolant mixture bit into his exposed forearms like fire. The skin started burning immediately, a sensation somewhere between a chemical burn and frostbite. He'd regret this later, probably spend hours in the medical bay getting treatment. But later didn't matter. Later was meaningless if this creature died right now, right here, while Tyler had the chance to save it. Easy, easy, he said, his voice softer now despite his racing heart. He knew the creature probably couldn't understand him without a working translator, but tone mattered. Tone always mattered. I'm going to get you out. I promise. Just hold on for me. The chains were even worse up close. Industrial-grade titanium alloy, the kind used to secure cargo containers that needed to survive atmospheric re-entry. Each link was as thick as Tyler's thumb. The locks were Vrexian make, which meant they were specifically designed to be tamper-proof. No easy bypass codes. No mechanical weaknesses to exploit. Just brute force between him and freedom. Tyler's plasma cutter roared to life with a high-pitched whine that echoed off the metal walls. The blue-white flame cast dancing shadows across the water's surface. 10 minutes left, according to his mental calculations. He pressed the cutter against the first chain link, and sparks flew in every direction, hissing as they hit the water. The titanium resisted, glowing red, then orange, then finally white-hot before the link separated with a sharp crack. One down. Tyler moved to the second link, his hands already shaking from the effort of holding the cutter steady. The cutter overheated halfway through the second link. Its safety systems kicked in automatically, shutting it down to prevent permanent damage. Tyler cursed, a string of words that would have made his mother wash his mouth out with soap. Without thinking, acting on pure desperate instinct, he dunked the entire cutting unit into the water to cool it faster. It was a risky move that could have shorted out the entire tool, leaving him with nothing. But he didn't have time for the standard cooling cycle. The wolf watched him with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. Even in its weakened state, even as the water crept higher toward its eyes, it watched Tyler work with an intensity that was almost human. 8 minutes left. The plasma cutter sputtered back to life and Tyler attacked the third chain link. But he could see now that he wasn't going to make it in time. Not at this rate. The chains were too thick, too resistant. His hands were cramping from the effort, and the tool kept overheating every few minutes. Tyler's mind raced back to his days working salvage operations on the Outer Rim stations. His old supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Rodriguez, had taught him a trick for dealing with stubborn metal. Heat the metal rapidly to extreme temperatures, then shock cool it immediately. The thermal expansion and contraction would create microfractures in the molecular structure, weakening it significantly. He switched tactics, working methodically now instead of frantically. Heat a section until it glowed white-hot, then plunge it into the freezing water. Listen for the sharp crack that meant the metal's internal structure was compromising. Repeat. Even as the water level rose higher, reaching the wolf's eyes, forcing it to tilt its head back at an unnatural angle just to breathe. 4 minutes left. Maybe less. Come on, come on, come on. Tyler shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. His arms felt like lead weights. His lungs burned. His forearms were covered in chemical burns that screamed with every movement. The final chain link shattered suddenly, and Tyler almost fell backward from the surprise of it. But he recovered instantly, dropping the plasma cutter and grabbing the massive creature under its front legs. He hauled backward with every ounce of strength his body possessed, his boots slipping on the wet metal floor, his muscles screaming in protest. They collapsed together onto a dry maintenance platform 15 feet away from the flooded section. Both of them gasping for air. Both of them alive. Tyler lay there for a moment, his chest heaving, his vision swimming with exhaustion and relief. Then he forced himself to sit up and really look at what he'd saved. The white wolf was even more massive out of the water. Easily 300 pounds of solid muscle beneath that matted, filthy fur. But it was the scars that made Tyler's blood run cold. Old scars crisscrossed the creature's body in patterns that spoke of violence. Fresh wounds that hadn't healed properly. And burns, circular burn marks that Tyler recognized immediately as shock stick injuries. Someone had tortured this creature. Systematically. Repeatedly. What the hell did they do to you? Tyler whispered, his hand hovering over the wolf's flank but not quite touching, afraid of causing more pain. Tyler's quarters weren't designed for 2 people, let alone 2 people plus a 300-pound alien wolf who could barely fit through the door. The space was maybe 200 square feet total, with a narrow bunk built into the wall, a tiny food prep area that could barely be called a kitchen, and a bathroom so small you had to step out to change your mind. But over the next 6 days they somehow made it work. The first night was the hardest. The creature, who Tyler had started calling Ghost because of that pure white fur, had barely moved at all. She'd managed to lap up water from an old mixing bowl Tyler had set out, her tongue rough and dry. Then she'd simply collapsed onto the floor beside his bunk and fallen into what looked like unconscious sleep. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, and Tyler had spent the entire night sitting on the floor beside her, one hand hovering near her flank, ready to react if she stopped breathing. He didn't sleep. Instead, he pulled up the station's public database on his data pad and started researching everything he could find about Lycaran physiology. The screen's blue glow lit up the dark quarters as he scrolled through medical files, biological studies, and cultural reports. He needed to know if the human antibiotics he'd used on her wounds were going to help or make things catastrophically worse. What he learned made his stomach twist. Lycarans were one of the galaxy's apex predator species. Proud warriors who valued strength above everything else. Aggressive hunters with reflexes 3 times faster than humans. According to every report he read, they were absolutely not the kind of species that ended up chained in flooded maintenance tunnels. They were the ones who did the chaining. By day 3, Ghost was finally moving around, though she moved stiffly, favoring her left side where the worst of her injuries were. Tyler had spent hours the previous night repairing her translator collar, carefully soldering new circuit boards he'd salvaged from broken equipment in his workshop. The collar was designed for a species with a completely different neck structure, so he'd had to modify the fit, adding extra padding so it wouldn't rub against her still healing wounds. When the translator finally powered on with a soft beep, Ghost's ears perked up. Then she spoke her first word, and her voice came through the device rough and unused, like someone who hadn't spoken in weeks. Why? Tyler looked up from the protein ration bar he was splitting between them for the 3rd meal in a row. His own stomach had been growling for days, but he made sure Ghost got the larger portion every time. Why what? Why save me? Ghost's amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Your species, humans. You have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor to protect yourselves. You are prey animals in the eyes of most of the galaxy. So why would you risk yourself for a complete stranger? Why waste your resources on someone you don't even know? Tyler shrugged, breaking off another piece of the ration bar and holding it out to her. Because you needed help. That's reason enough, isn't it? Ghost's amber eyes narrowed to slits, and her ears flattened against her skull. That is foolish. Dangerously foolish. Maybe, Tyler admitted, chewing his own small piece of the tasteless bar. But I was raised to believe that standing by when someone's dying makes you just as guilty as the person who put them in that situation. It doesn't matter if they're human or not. Doesn't matter if I know them or not. What matters is that I could help, so I did. I am a fighter, Ghost said, her voice dropping lower. A killer. I have taken lives. Many lives. I was chained in that chamber because I tried to escape from my owner after years of... You don't have an owner, Tyler interrupted, his voice firm and leaving no room for argument. You're a person. A living, thinking, feeling person. And people can't be owned. Not by anyone. Not for any reason. Ghost stared at him like he'd just spoken in some completely alien language that her translator couldn't process. Her head tilted slightly to one side, confusion written clearly across her wolfish features. That is not how the galaxy works, human. Ownership, slavery, indentured servitude. These things are common. Legal. Accepted. Then the galaxy's wrong, Tyler said simply, meeting her eyes without flinching. Over the following days, Ghost watched Tyler's routine with growing confusion that slowly transformed into something else entirely. She watched him work double shifts, sometimes 16 hours straight, coming home so exhausted he could barely stand. All to earn enough credits to buy food for both of them. She saw him turn down a lucrative job offer from a wealthy Vrexian merchant, a job that would have paid enough to clear his debts and more, simply because accepting it meant leaving her alone in his quarters while she was still too weak to defend herself. On day 5, Tyler came home carrying medical supplies instead of food. Antibiotics, wound sealant, and pain medication specifically formulated for Lycaran physiology. Items that cost a small fortune on the station's black market. Ghost's nose caught an unfamiliar scent on him. She sniffed carefully, then her eyes went wide. Where is your transport chip? She demanded suddenly. Tyler busied himself organizing the medical supplies, not meeting her eyes. What chip? Your return ticket to Earth. Every human who works contract on this station carries their return chip. I can always smell the biometric coding. Where is yours? Tyler finally looked at her, his expression calm. I traded it. You what? Ghost surged to her feet, ignoring the pain the movement caused. That was your only way home. 5 years you've worked here. I heard you tell Jenny you were finally going back next month. Earth will still be there next year, Tyler said quietly, opening the antibiotic package. You wouldn't have been. These wounds were getting infected. Without proper treatment, you'd have been dead in a week, maybe less. For the first time in her entire life, Ghost of the Lycaran warrior caste felt something she'd never experienced before. Shame. But not the shame of defeat in combat. Not the shame of showing weakness. This was something different entirely. This was the shame of having assumed this human would be like every other species she'd encountered. Selfish. Calculating. Cruel. Looking out for themselves first, last, and always. Your people, she said quietly, settling back down onto the floor. Are they all like this? All like you? Tyler smiled, a tired but genuine expression. Some are better than me, honestly. Some are worse. But most of us? Yeah, when it really counts, we try to do the right thing. Even when it costs us. Even when it's hard. It's just what makes us human, I guess. Ghost lowered her massive head onto her paws, her mind racing with thoughts that would have been considered heresy among her own kind. Her people believed that strength was everything. That power determined worth. That the weak deserved their fate. But watching this small, clawless, fangless human sacrifice everything for a stranger made her question everything she'd ever been taught. Perhaps humanity's lack of natural weapons wasn't a weakness at all. Perhaps it was exactly what allowed them to see past violence as the only answer to every problem. Perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about humans all along. Tyler was halfway through installing a new power converter for a civilian transport ship when he heard the bay doors slide open with their characteristic hiss. He didn't look up immediately, figuring it was just another customer or maybe Jenny stopping by to borrow a tool. His hands were deep in the ship's power systems, carefully routing the new cables through the junction box. Then he felt it. That change in air pressure that came when a lot of bodies entered a space at once. The sudden silence that fell over the bay like a heavy blanket. Tyler's instincts, honed from 5 years working in the rougher parts of the station, started screaming warnings. He looked up and his blood ran cold. Krivak stood in the doorway. The Collector, as everyone on the station knew him, was a Vrexian crime lord who controlled half the illegal operations in the lower levels. He stood 8 feet tall, his body covered in dark green scales that looked like armored plates. Pure muscle and cold, calculating intelligence wrapped in a reptilian form that had probably seen 100 fights and won them all. Behind him, 6 armed mercenaries fanned out across the bay with practiced efficiency, blocking every exit. Their weapons weren't drawn, but their hands rested on holsters in a way that made their intentions crystal clear. Tyler's hands stilled on his tools. His heart started hammering against his ribs so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The human mechanic, Krivak's translator purred, the device converting his hissing speech into smooth, almost friendly words that didn't match the predatory gleam in his eyes. We need to have a conversation about stolen property. Tyler forced his voice to stay level, even though his mouth had gone dry. Don't know what you're talking about. No. Krivak took a step closer and Tyler had to fight the urge to back up. My albino Likaran. 6 days missing. Very valuable. Very rare. And you, little human, were seen near the maintenance level where she was being kept. Funny coincidence, don't you think? Tyler's mind raced. Someone had talked. Someone had seen him that day. Of course they had. He'd been covered in coolant and carrying a plasma cutter. He'd been too focused on saving Ghost to worry about being subtle. I'm willing to be reasonable about this, Krivak continued, his scaled lips pulling back to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Return her to me and I'll pay you 50,000 credits. That's more than fair. Enough to buy passage to your Earth and live comfortably for a year, I believe. Maybe more. 50,000 credits. The number hit Tyler like a physical blow. He'd never seen that much money in his entire life. His entire savings account, built up over 5 years of hard work, was maybe 3,000 credits. 50,000 could change everything. He could go home. See his family again. Start that repair shop he'd always dreamed about. All he had to do was hand over Ghost. She's not property, Tyler said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Krivak laughed, a sound like metal grinding against metal. It echoed off the bay's walls, making several of the mercenaries shift uncomfortably. Everything is property if you're strong enough to claim it, human. That's how the galaxy works. That's how it's always worked. Surely even your primitive species understands this basic truth. She's not for sale, Tyler repeated, his hands tightening on the wrench he was holding. Not for sale. The bay went completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the deck plating. One of the mercenaries, a Kthari enforcer with 4 arms and more combat experience than Tyler had years alive, stepped forward with his weapon half-raised. Tyler, don't be stupid. Jenny's voice suddenly rang out from the doorway behind Krivak's group. But she wasn't alone. Krivak turned, and his confident expression flickered for just a moment. Behind Jenny stood at least 30 other humans. Mechanics still holding their tools. Janitors gripping their cleaning equipment like weapons. Cargo handlers with loading bars across their shoulders. Food service workers from the cafeteria 3 levels up. All the humans who worked Nexus Station's lower levels, the ones that most aliens didn't even bother to learn the names of. And all of them were armed with whatever they had on hand. Wrenches. Plasma cutters. Industrial hammers. Cargo hooks. One guy Tyler recognized from the water recycling plant was holding a massive pipe that looked like it could cave in a skull with one swing. They weren't warriors. Most of them had probably never been in a real fight in their lives. Hell, old man Harper was pushing 70 and had a bad knee. But they stood together in Tyler's bay with a quiet, unmovable determination that was somehow more intimidating than any display of weapons could be. The human said no. Harper spoke up, his weathered hands adjusting their grip on a heavy pipe wrench that had to weigh 15 pounds. Reckon that's the end of it, friend? Krivak's expression shifted from amusement to careful calculation. His mercenaries were professionals, Tyler could see that. Trained fighters who'd probably seen real combat. They could take this group of untrained humans in a straight fight. Probably. Maybe. But there was something in the way the humans stood together, shoulder to shoulder, that gave even the professional killers pause. Humans had been developing a reputation on the station networks lately. They bonded in ways other species didn't. They protected their own with a ferocity that had nothing to do with natural weapons or combat training and everything to do with something the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humans simply refused to abandon each other. Ever. This isn't over, Krivax hissed, his tail lashing behind him in barely contained fury. That Lakaran is worth 200,000 credits on the fighting circuit. 200,000. I will have her back, human. Count on it. You're welcome to try, Tyler said quietly, meeting the crime lord's eyes without flinching. But you'll have to go through all of us first. Every single one of us. Krivax's tail lashed once more, striking the deck with a sharp crack. Then he turned and stalked from the bay, his scaled body radiating anger. His mercenaries followed, but their body language was uncertain, their eyes constantly flickering back to the assembled humans as they retreated. After they left and the bay doors hissed shut, Tyler's legs almost gave out. The adrenaline that had been holding him upright suddenly drained away and he stumbled. Jenny was there instantly, catching his arm and steadying him. "You okay?" she asked, concern written across her face. "Yeah," Tyler managed, his voice shaky now that the danger had passed. "Yeah, I'm good." He looked around at the assembled humans, his people, and felt something swell in his chest. Pride. Gratitude. A sense of belonging that went deeper than words could express. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Thank you." "We look after our own," Harper said simply, setting his pipe wrench down with a heavy thunk. "Always have, always will. That's the human way, son. That's what we do." 2 weeks passed since Tyler had confronted Krivax. Each day felt heavier than the last, waiting for something to happen. But Tyler and the other human workers hadn't been sitting idle. They'd been talking to every person they could find who'd been hurt by Krivax. Recording testimonies. Gathering evidence. Building a case that even the corrupt parts of station security couldn't ignore. When the raid finally came, it was swift and brutal. Tyler heard about it from Jenny, who'd been monitoring the security channels. Station security stormed Krivax's fighting pits at dawn cycle, when most of the station was still quiet. What they found made even the hardened security officers sick. 17 fighters, all enslaved. Some had been there for years. The conditions were worse than anyone had imagined. Cramped cells barely big enough to lie down in. Stale food and dirty water. Medical injuries that had never been treated properly. And the documents, dozens of forged contracts, fake debt records, falsified ownership papers. Krivax had built his entire operation on lies and suffering. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Krivax's wealthy friends couldn't protect him. Within 48 hours he was banned from all consortium space for life. His assets were frozen. His business partners scattered like roaches when the lights came on. The fighters he'd enslaved were finally free. Tyler watched the news coverage from his workshop. Except it wasn't really his old workshop anymore. The Human Workers Collective had pooled their resources and given him a business loan. Now he had proper equipment, better tools, and enough space to actually move around. It felt almost too good to be true. Ghost sat beside him on the workbench, her white fur finally clean and shining with health. The scars were still there, would always be there, but she carried them differently now. Not with shame, but with pride. Battle marks from a war she'd survived. "Your people did this," Ghost said quietly, watching the news feed. "For me?" Tyler shook his head. "Not just for you. For everyone Krivax was hurting. For all those fighters. For anyone who might have been next. But yeah, you started it all. If I hadn't heard you crying that night, none of this would have happened." Ghost was quiet for a long time. Tyler had learned that silence from her usually meant she was thinking deeply about something. Finally she spoke again. "I contacted my homeworld," she said. "Told them everything that happened. About you. About humans. About how you saved me when no one else would." Tyler turned to look at her. "Yeah. What did they say?" Ghost's ears flattened against her skull, a sign Tyler now recognized as frustration or anger. "They said I'd gone soft. That I'd dishonored my pack by being saved by prey animals. That a true Lakaran would have died fighting rather than accept help from humans." The pain in her voice cut deep. Tyler wanted to say something, but Ghost wasn't finished. "I told them they were fools," she continued, her voice stronger now. "I told them humans aren't prey. You're something the galaxy hasn't seen before. You have no claws, no natural weapons, no thick hide or armor. Your bodies are soft and weak by most standards. But you have something so much stronger." "What's that?" Tyler asked. Ghost's amber eyes locked onto his. "You see someone in chains and you cannot walk away. You face impossible odds because someone needs help. You band together not because you're afraid but because you actually care about each other. You love fiercely even people you barely know. That is a strength my people have forgotten. A strength I want to learn. Tyler felt his throat tighten with emotion. So you're staying? If you'll have me. As your partner. Your friend. Ghost paused and her tail swished once. Your pack. Tyler smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Ghost, you've been packed since the moment I pulled you out of that dirty water. They opened their new business the following week. Brennan and Ghost Technical Solutions had a nice ring to it. The sign outside their shop showed a human handshake meeting a Lacaran paw. It became known quickly across the station, not just for fair prices and honest work, but for something more important. It was a place where anyone could find help, regardless of what species they were or how much money they had. 3 months later, the station's emergency sirens screamed to life. A cargo bay had collapsed in the lower levels. A Kthari child was trapped inside, buried under tons of metal and debris. The rescue teams were saying it was too dangerous, that they needed to wait for specialized equipment. Tyler and Ghost didn't wait. They grabbed their tools and ran. But they weren't alone. Jenny was right behind them carrying her medical kit. Harper, Rodriguez, Williams, and a dozen other humans followed. And then something remarkable happened. Other species joined them too. A Vrexian engineer brought his cutting tools. 2 Kthari traders who knew the cargo bay layout. Even a Lacaran merchant who'd heard Ghost's story and wanted to help. Together they pulled that child from the wreckage. Humans directing traffic. Lacarans using their strength. Kthari squeezing into tight spaces. Vrexians cutting through metal. Species who normally barely spoke to each other working as one unit, one team, one purpose. As Tyler watched it all unfold, he felt Ghost's shoulder press against his. Her fur was dusty and she was breathing hard, but her eyes were bright. You're changing things, she said quietly. Your kind is teaching the galaxy a new way to be. Tyler wiped sweat from his forehead. We're just doing what's right. Ghost's tail curled around his ankle, a gesture of affection he'd learned meant trust and family. That, she replied softly, is exactly my point. Above them, Nexus Station kept spinning through space the same as always. But something fundamental had shifted. One human mechanic had heard a cry for help in the darkness and refused to walk away. That simple choice had started ripples that spread further than anyone could have imagined. Humanity's real power wasn't in weapons or technology. It was in the stubborn, unshakable belief that every life mattered. That you helped because it was right, not because it was easy. That you stood up for others even when it cost you everything. That was what made humans special. That was what made them extraordinary. And the galaxy was finally beginning to understand.